Alrighty, this is our introduction to Google Sheets and the first project that we're going to work on in this class utilizing this new tool. Now, hopefully people have had some exposure to Google Sheets, but if not, that's okay. This is what this introductory lesson is for. As we look at Google Sheets, there's a couple ways we can get there. So the first is just from Google Docs. So hopefully people are familiar with Google Docs. In the sandwich menu here, we got this hamburger drop down that gives us Docs, Sheets, Slides, and Forms. We're interested in Sheets, so you can click it directly from here, or you can just search and click into it from a Sheets login. So either way, we're going to end up in the same place. When we are on Google Sheets, you will see projects that are recent in this little drop down bottom here, and then we can also start a blank new worksheet. Now, if you are copying a sheet, you can go off of that as well, same as you would in a Google Doc. So open it up, create a copy, and go from there. Now I'm going to go through an example, and as I go through this, I'm going to kind of recreate it on the right here. So when we're doing this class, a lot of times I'm going to have these examples, I'm going to have walkthroughs of things that you can do. Feel free to Google things whenever you want. Finding your own solutions is oftentimes more beneficial than just kind of watching me do it, because you are the one leading that learning process. So just keep in mind here, if you know exactly what's going on, feel free to skip ahead in the video. And if you don't and feel overwhelmed, that's okay. Don't worry, we're going to get through it. So the first one I'm going to start here is with example 1. I'm going to move through 4 examples I'm going to walk through for us, but the first one is just how to use Google Sheets as a budgeting tool. So the topic here that we're looking at in Unit 1 is budgeting. Now what I've done here is I've created a cell, and by clicking in it, I can change what the text is. So by clicking in a cell, like I'm clicking in E1 right here, the columns are denoted in letters and the rows are numbered. So clicking in E1 here, I could start typing anything I want, like high class, right? So now if I hit enter or click into another cell, it now remains in that one cell. As I'm looking to do any formatting or whatever, I want to change the cell, I can do a fill with color, so I could change it into a blue cell. I can also do a formula in here, so if I were to click into a new cell and I were to type equals, I could start doing a formula like 2 plus 3. It's going to give me 5. So we can basically make Google Sheets do the math for us. Now this 2 plus 5 is pretty handy, but what if there's some other stuff that we're more interested in rather than just a fixed number? That's what we're going to look at here. So here I would organize by whatever the topic is. So here I've got car repair cost. Now with this car repair cost, I have my expenses listed out here, and I have my costs listed out for each of those expenses here. Now for each of these things, again, there's a million different applications for things that we can throw in here, but this is just going to start us off. So looking at the cost for each of these things, I have it as a dollar denomination. Now if I just typed in the number 5 here, whether I'm doing it from an equation or if I just typed in the number 6, I'll just do below, it's formatted as a general number. To change this formatting, I want to click in the cell, and then I want to select the format. So I can do it as currency, a percentage, I can adjust my decimal places, and I can also look at additional formats. We're not going to use these super often, but the date and time are the ones that pop out in my mind as ones that kind of sometimes need us to use that additional drop down. So let's say I wanted the 5, instead of as a numerical representation, to have a currency format. I would click currency, and it changed now to a dollar denomination. So the way I was able to turn this 300 into 300 in cash is to change its formatting to currency. Now I can take that and I can copy the format. So Paint Format says, okay, take the way that this cell looks and copy it onto the new cell that I click. So that took the color and the formatting and changed that 6. So what we can do is we can either select multiple cells to change. So in this example here, I'm highlighting these cells from A1 to B8, and I can change the color on it. So let's say I really didn't like that kind of pink, I wanted to turn it into more of this kind of pink. I'm able to change all of those colors. And if you want to change something back, you can always just undo or hit Control Z. Now as I look at this, I'm saying, okay, well this is the cost, these are fixed things, I've got this from a quote or something like that, but I want this total to be a live total. Now there's 2 ways I can do this. One is I can use a sum function. So this equals sum is now setting up an equation that's going to use some values. Now if you hover over sum, or if you wanted to Google this and do it in a totally different tab, either way works, it'll start telling you about the function. Now some of the first ones you use, you're probably going to have no clue as to how or why they exist or what they are, but once you use them a few times they become second nature. So the first one here, sum, can take either a set of values that you click one at a time and separate them with a comma, that's what this is doing up here, or you can take a range of values. So A2 to A100 would be some giant, column down from the second cell to the 100th cell here. Now as I look at this, I'm going to click out of it and click back into it. If I click up here, it is highlighting these 3 cells. So this is the range of values. It's from B4 to B6. Now as I'm looking at that, that's these 3 cells here. So what it's doing is it's summing, aka adding them all up, and it's giving me a total right here. So basically, I'm able to also do that more manually if I were to type an equation. So equations always start with equal, and then I could click this cell. So now I see B4 here, and I can say, okay, I want B4 plus B5 plus B6, and hit enter. We would see we get the same answer, right? We're going to sum to the same amount. Now what if I change one of these amounts? So here, if I change my tire amount to 500, let's say I want to splurge a little bit, I see that my 850 turned to 950 because it's reflecting the live change we just made. This is one thing we want to use as a very, very powerful tool versus if I just were going through and saying, okay, equals 300 plus 150 plus 500, right? So this is a fixed amount. This is not going to change. These are the actual values that I have here, but if I go back and change them, let's say we'll make it 300, this updates and this updates, but this one does not. So that's why using equations is more powerful, allows us to change these values. I can also do the same using revenue, so taking these things and adding them up. So now we see here I have lemonade ST. If I click this cell, it says lemonade stand. Well, it's not very helpful if I can't see the full cell here. To adjust a column, I can double click right here. As soon as my mouse turns to those little arrows, if I double click, it'll auto adjust to the length of the column that I want. Now I can also manually do this by just clicking and dragging, but by double clicking, it's going to auto format to whatever the longest length of that column is. So here we see car repair cost and lemonade stand are pretty similar. Now the reason that this was not hidden before is that there's nothing in this cell here, it's just empty. Versus in this scenario, we do have a value here. If we have a value, then it starts cutting off. Now we can change this depending on what we want by wrapping the text around, or we can clip it. So here, the overflow is the default. It basically says, okay, as long as there's nothing here, just keep kind of writing whatever the text was. So that's what we saw here. So again, I can double click this, or I can just adjust it. So if I wanted to adjust it really far out, I could. And then by double clicking, it'll bring it back to match that length. Let's look at example 2 here. So now I'm combining, I took the exact same values from the last example here, before I changed them. I have some car repair costs, and I also have some job money. So this job money is going to get a little bit more complex compared to what we were just previously looking at. In example 1, I just had a set revenue from each of these different items. In example 2, I'm now saying I have a daily revenue and a number of days worked. So when I look at daily revenue times the number of days worked, that'll be the total amount of money that I made. And I'm going to do that with a formula. So I'm going to say equals B14 times C14. By doing that, I'm saying, okay, take this number times this number and tell me the total. And that's what gives me my 150. Now, let's just say, for example, I didn't have these two and I was going to create these cells. To do this, I can click in my initial equation formula here, and I can take it and I can drag it down. By clicking in that bottom right corner and dragging it down, I'm dropping the equation down into these other two cells. If I click this cell here, and I look at what it's using by clicking into the formula bar, I see it's using the $20 times the 6 days that I worked. If I click in the bottom one here, it'll be using that $600 times the 1 day that I worked. To look at the total here, again, I am just summing these values here. Now I want to look at net funds. Net means I'm going to take my income or revenue and I'm going to subtract out all of my expenses. My net is a new formula. I'm going to be using my expenses and I'm going to be using my income, and it's income minus expenses. So here we have B24 minus B23. Now these cells here are just linking back to old cells. So this is the total from above, and this is the total from above right here as well. So when we're looking at these things, if I change this value here to say $300 in tires, then it's going to update this to $750, which will update down here, and my net cost is going to update as well because it's taking that formula and tracing it all the way through. That's how powerful these formulas are. Having a nice subtotal like this helps us just look at the job money, and we can also highlight an even more succinct format like this. One note for formatting here is typically if I've got a title, I'll sometimes leave a space in between the actual table itself, and the total will also have a space included in between. And then if I want to change, I'll sometimes do a double. So again, formatting changes person to person. It's a preference thing most of all. There are definitely some best practices, but typically we'll try and separate these things, and by highlighting them in colors is a really easy way to just denote this is the cost, this is the money, and this is something else going on here. Just to kind of give you some rationale for that. So here we're going to look at an example of trying to utilize Google Sheets to make the program do the work for us. Mr. G works at PHS, which pays $12 an hour. Mr. G has $100 in his bank account. He works for 15 hours a week. He wants to get a $700 face tattoo. That's what I've always wanted. How many weeks will I have to save up for it? So here I'm going to say I start out with $100. Now that starting out is from my bank account. So I start with $100 in my bank account. I make $12 an hour. So again, here, $12 an hour, I'm just going to put 12. Hours worked, here's 15. So here I had 15 hours a week that I was working. What I want is the cost is $700. So I want $700 for this face tattoo. Me and Mike Tyson are going to match. This week's worked, I've highlighted in yellow because this is a value I'm going to change. This equation is taking all of these things, B3, B4 times B5, and I'm saying minus my $700. So as I'm looking at this, it's saying, okay, take the starting amount, add in the money I make per hour times the number of hours, and now here I'm saying, okay, times this week's worked. So this is saying I worked this many hours for this amount per hour for this many weeks. If you want to break this down into doing a weekly subtotal first, you could do that as well. But really it's just the amount I make per hour times the number of hours times the number of weeks. And I'm going to subtract off the cost to do my face tattoo, which is $700. That's the equation right here. Now if I change one of these things, let's say I started with $150 instead, we should see my ending amount going up by $50. If I were to change the amount that I make per hour to $10 an hour instead of 12, we would see this changes my net amount here. If I change the number of hours a week that I work, say I change this to 13, we would see again a change in that final amount. If I change the amount of the face tattoo itself, so instead of 700, let's say it was 800, we would see an increase here in the cost, which would drop down my net that I have. So now what this is doing is it's using the number of weeks worked here in yellow. If I want to adjust this, let's just say I work 1 week. I still need $420 to save. Let's say I work 2 weeks. Now I need $240. If I work 3 weeks, I would need $60. And so by working 4 weeks, I have enough money to pay for my face tattoo, and I've got $120 left over. You can break this out into individual categories as well. Like if you just want to break it down into money made and the expense, that's a perfectly fine way of looking at it. Again, I'm just trying to show you some examples, and I want to give you the option and flexibility to do what works best for you. Ultimately, we're all going to arrive at the same answer, hopefully. So here, how many weeks to save up for it? 4 weeks. we're basically saying there's no partial weeks here. Last example is a little bit long, but hopefully not too complex. So here, I'm going to read this off just so we're all on the same page. It may be a little small font-wise. So here it says, Mr. G has a number of hobbies that he enjoys to do. He likes to get a $3 bagel every day he works, and he works 5 days a week all year long. Keep in mind there's 52 weeks in a year. He likes to throw a penny in his backyard wishing well every Saturday. So every Saturday means that's a weekly thing that I do. Once a month, he goes out to eat at Paul Bunyan's House of Pancakes and orders the $20 tall stack and eats it in one sitting. Never get a stomachache. Strong like a tiger. Here we got 2 times a year, he takes a submarine trip to visit SpongeBob at Bikini Bottom, and he rides the sub for a $45 round trip. So again, 2 times a year, I'm taking that sub trip. Once a year, he buys a $1,200 mega pack of fireworks to celebrate the beginning of the school year. What does his annual budget look like? What percentage of Mr. G's budget is spent on bagels? So now let's try and organize all this information here, because there's a lot going on. So the first thing I would do is I would start itemizing my expenses. I have bagel, wishing well, pancakes, sub trip to Bikini Bottom, and fireworks. I denote the cost of each of those things. When I'm doing this, I'm just saying the cost per event. So every bagel that I buy is $3. Now the number of bagels I get is what I'll get to later on. Wishing well, throw a penny in. Pancakes, $20 when I go get the tall stack. $45 trip for sub. And then the $1,200 for the mega pack of fireworks. Now for frequency, here's where I start to use my equations again. So here I'm going to say, okay, well this is 5 days a week for 52 weeks a year equals 260. Now you can do that out, just input it as a hard-coded 260 as well, and that's perfectly fine. For the next one here, we say, okay, well the wishing well is every week, so that's weekly, 52 times a year. Monthly pancakes means I'm going to have them 12 times a year. I take 2 sub trips, and I get 1 mega pack of fireworks, so once a year here. So those are all my frequencies. Now for the totals, I'm just taking the cost times the frequency, right? How much it was times the number of times I did it. And I have all these totals right here. Now as I look at these totals, one thing you may notice is in the bottom right corner here is as I highlight cells, it gives me a sum total here. Now there's a number of different things that I can look at, and if I click this little arrow, it pops them up for me. These are very, very helpful summary statistics for the cells that I click in. Now it's not always going to display, like if I highlight these 3 here, I've got a 3 count, but there's no math going on there. So looking at these totals, I see that it sums up to $2,310.52. The way that I do that is with my sum equation. Again, I could say equals and then this plus this plus this plus this plus this, but it's much easier to just drag and drop. As I look at the next question, because I just answered the first one, what does my annual budget look like? This is my annual budget. What percentage of Mr. G's budget is spent on bagels? Well, it ends up it's a pretty large amount. The total cost for bagels, which I'm grabbing from this total up here, was $7.80. The total budget, which I'm grabbing from right here, and then doing some math here to find the percentage. So this is going to be the bagel money divided by the total amount of money. And this answer here is a percentage. So again, I can change this to just being an automatic number, 0.3375, etc. But I really would love this to display as a percentage, so I'm going to format as a percentage. Let's say I wasn't so interested in these decimal places. Let's say I wanted a percentage rounded to the nearest whole number. That's where I can start decreasing my decimal places, or I could increase if I wanted to. So if I decrease this twice, I see it round to 34. Again, we see anytime we have 5 or higher here, it's going to round up. So we see that if we were to knock off a couple decimal places, about 34% of my budget is spent on bagels. Whew. Hopefully this is a helpful explanation for Google Sheets, a nice little intro for you here. I'm going to have a project which involves us going through and creating budgets for ourselves. We'll work through all of these sort of learning hiccups as we go. If Google Sheets is a little bit slow for you, it could be a connectivity issue, so it does edit live. So sometimes if it seems like things aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, just give it a sec to catch up with you. And again, at the bottom here, I have multiple sheets available. So when I'm looking at creating another sheet, I just click this little add sheet button down here, and now here's my new sheet. So a sheet 4 is always it'll always default to just sheet 1, 2, 3, 4, blah, blah, blah. To edit this, I just double click it, and I can say new fancy sheet here, and I've got my new fancy sheet, and I can start doing whatever it is that I want to do. I could say I have 5 dogs and 4 cats, and I could say the total number of animals here is going to equal the sum of these two things. Boom, 9 animals in total. Just another quick example of how we're utilizing Google Sheets here, and we can do whatever it is that we want.